at the end chat lady while we wait in the chat if you want to drop in your name, your preferred gender pronouns, what city you are, and then acknowledging the Native American historical land if you know it in the chat. That would be awesome. And I'm glad everyone's here. So I am so excited to introduce Morowa Yejidé. She is a native of Washington, D.C., and the author of the critically acclaimed novel Time of the Locust, which was a 2012 finalist for the PEN Bellwether Prize and long listed for the 2015 PEN Bingham Prize and the 2015 NAACP Image Award nominee. She lives in the DC area with her husband and 3 sons, and Creatures of Passage, which we'll be discussing today, is her second novel. So if you want to unmute yourself and applaud or like give a thumbs up in the chat, I'm super excited to have Morowa here today with us. And I'm excited that you got your COVID shot and you're here and you're safe. So excited for all those things.
Having been so recently made by God, Dash's mind was a delicate, elegant machine. And when he saw something too big to fit into that divine creation, his mind tried to break it down into smaller parts that could be more easily handled. For children of the ghetto, like children of war, learn to see the world in bits. They hear it in segments. Life happens before them and moves into them and through them in pieces, so that a murder can be witnessed with a laser-sharp recollection not of the blood, but of the newness of the Converse Chuck Taylor All-Star sneakers on the body. The reason a woman is on the corner at night is not thought about, only that her daughter is a classmate. The wino singing at the entrance of the neighborhood corner store is merely part of the gateway to the happy purchase of candy. The tracks on the addict's arms as he sits on a bucket are eclipsed by the sound of the genius inside of him as he plays the trumpet in his hand. Used needles and weed butts on the sidewalk are noticed only in proximity to the penny that someone dropped. Find a penny, pick it up. All day long, you'll have good luck. So that Dash lived in and around a traumatized world, and he experienced it much like the candy that defined his childhood, in smaller bits and pieces that could more easily fit into the fragile spaces of his 10-year-old mind. So it was no surprise that the divine machinery of Dash's mind tried to break the enormity of a thing into smaller, more palatable bits and pieces whenever he thought about the keyhole, the door, and the dimension. There was no door, just a wall. There was a girl who was there, but now she was gone. So that's just one section of Creatures of Passage.
Oh, thank you for reading that excerpt. And for me, it's like a brilliant example of Creatures of Passage isn't just like telling a story, but we really get to like sit into these characters' minds, right? And how they connect and interconnect and almost sometimes past each other in terms of that connection. And not even just about like the way you describe like not just Dash's experience, but like the mentality of a 10-year-old child witnessing something so like heinous and trying to comprehend it, right? I thought was really profound.
You know, I didn't want to it's difficult to find just the right calibration to discuss trauma because it's something so horrific. If you go into so much description and so much detail, it can actually eclipse the impact, which is really the point, you know, the reasons, the causations, and the impact. And so I try to write around, you know, that monster in the room or the 800-pound gorilla and write around that so that we could get a deeper view of how something like that could happen and what the fallout of something like that could be. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you did that masterfully because there are definitely some scenes I was like, how much detail are we going to get? But I think you were
Yeah.
good to like get us to the room, open the door, and then take a step back and like, this is the context. And the timeline is like, we could see like the immediate impact, the longer term impact to like the individual and the community, and like
Mm-hmm.
the weaving of that connection, which I thought was amazing. So one of the questions that we got, which is from Leah Gordon, was what are magical realism books that you especially love or and inspired creatures of passage?
Oh yeah. Okay, so
And sorry, and Sade, we can go back and highlight Morowa, please. Go ahead.
I would say, yeah, there's quite a few books, literary fiction books that have inspired. But for magical realism, which as you could probably tell, I really enjoy and like writing and using that. I would say Gabriel Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude would definitely be, one of my favorites and an inspiration. I loved particularly how he dealt with time, a family over a long period of time. And so, Black people in this country are a family in a very real sense, brought together under the worst conditions possible. But it's in many ways, I tried to paint our family experience, community experience over time. So the book is set in 77, but I extrapolated from back to the past and then to that moment in time and then forward to the future. So, but magical realism, I find, is a wonderful way to um, give the reader an alternate view of something, or maybe look at something, turn something a different way, and get a different view of it. So, having that fantastic fantastical right next to the mundane is a I just was always fascinated by that. I love how one bounces off the other and you really get a deeper, richer sense of both.
So I don't know if writers think this way, but as you wrote it, were you thinking like, as people read this, I want the reader to process or come away with X? And is that different from a reader now versus a reader 5 or 10 years from now?
Oh, yeah, see, okay. So the thing is, I'm one of those writers where I can block everything and everyone out while I'm writing. So the I don't write when I don't think about, oh, the writer might think this or that. That only comes into play when it's finished and I'm looking at, the editing, and I'll read it aloud. I read the whole book aloud, and see how something strikes me, see how something uh, feels when it's heard. And I might tweak from there. I mean, it's really a pact, right? You're making a special agreement between writer and reader, and the reader is trusting you to tell the story in a way that gives a larger understanding of something, or or enables them as the reader to come to their own understanding of something.
How long did it take you to write this work? And overall, what is your writing process?
Okay, so that one is it's a question I get a lot, but the answer is probably not what you think. um, this book, every book is different, right? Time of the Locust was a different process for me because for a lot of reasons. But Creatures of Passage basically took 17 years to write, and I say that because it was our youngest son, who's 18 now, he's the clock. The joke we make is he's the clock for the book. He was a newborn. He was like 4 weeks old when I started it. And, it for me, And I think for many writers, you know, there's a fallacy, there's a fantasy that there's this writing life, and you know, you can go in a cabin and there's a roaring fire, and you know, you have a mahogany desk and a, you know, $3,000 typewriter and all this kind of stuff. But that wasn't my life. My life was, you know, kids, jobs, you know, life interruptions. So the book very much grew with me over the years. Grew, it morphed along with the city changing over the years as I matured. Um, Things became more important to me than other things were when I was, you know, in my 20s. Um, the core elements of the story, though, remain the same from the very inception, which was, you know, the concern with what happens to people who um, everyday people who have to face extraordinary circumstances.
So in Egyptian mythology, Osiris and Nephthys are not always described as twins. Why was it important to you to have Nephthys be a twin?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. Okay, so it is true. In Egyptian mythology, there are multiple myth stories about the five gods, Osiris and Nephthys being one of them. They were all sibling gods. I added the dimension of twins because I was interested in having a stronger bond, exploring that stronger bond of twins. Um, I think because Nephthys lives she's in the living world, and her brother is in the world of the dead. I just thought it was more interesting to have the, you know, that symmetry um, between them, but they're, you know, kind of on opposite sides of the fence. Um, and also because I've always, as an only child, I've always been fascinated by sibling dynamics, sibling relationships. You know, I watched the brotherhood of my three boys. It very interesting.
So when we did our run through, Morowa was like, "Oh, I always forget to share my website." And I was like, "Don't worry, we got you. We'll just like put it up in the end, and I'll drop it in the chat. So let me copy it and paste it, and then I'll drop it in the chat. So this is where you can learn more about Morowa. You can learn about upcoming events. What else is on your website, Morowa?
There's some links to some interviews that I did. All of the I'm also going to add some information about the audio book as well, because that seems to be doing well. So I'm very happy about that. Audiophile did a wonderful review on Creatures of Passage as the audio book. So that'll be added as well.
I really enjoyed the audiobook. I think you did an amazing job.
Thank